You're listening to the Player Layer podcast, and today's conversation is with Ben Downton, whom we spoke with during his Kickstarter, Micro Dojo. Ben runs Prometheus Game Labs, and they successfully funded last month with almost 2,000 backers and £16,000 raised for a micro game that costs only £5. I can highly recommend the game. It's a two-player micro game with an included solo mode, and I just was fascinated by the game and with Ben's journey. So hopefully this conversation will inspire you, and you will learn more about making a micro game and about running your first Kickstarter, doing the research and what to look for. I just think Ben did such a fantastic job that I think you're going to enjoy this. So yeah, thank you so much for listening and enjoy this episode. I'm with Ben Downton today, who's the creator of Micro Dojo, a really... Actually, could you pitch it for me, Ben? Tell me what the game's about.
Yeah, so it's a micro game, so it's designed for like really low cost shipping, and it fits in your pocket. It's a single punch board that has everything you need on it. It's, I would say, kind of a worker placement game, but you have shared workers. So the core of it is you're moving one of the four workers on this 3x3 grid, so 9 spaces. And there's a lot of kind of tactical movement to it where you're blocking your opponent, or you're trying to predict your next move or their next move and what's going to be available. For the theme, you're two daimyo in Edo period Japan. You're trying to win favor with the shogun by bringing prosperity to this small town. So by using the town's retainers, you're going to move around the board, gather resources, build buildings, and then score objectives. And hopefully you'll be the favored daimyo.
It's a really awesome game. I actually really loved it from the first time I playtested it, which was like in very early development as well last year. So could you tell me what the process was like for you? Just I think this is your first game, right?
Yeah, it's certainly the first one I've published. It's probably I would say the second one that I've developed to a decent extent. When I started out in game design, I just had one game idea. It was actually to make a video game, and then I realized that was going to be super hard. And my brother suggested try making it a board game. So I spent kind of a couple of months on that. But then when it was clear that wasn't really going in the direction I wanted it to, it led me towards sort of other ideas. And of course, it's hard to just make one game. And Micro Dojo was great as a first game because it's fairly small. So it was easier to sort of test and play test and produce. It also fit really well with running a first Kickstarter campaign, because being small and being very cheap to ship internationally, it means I could reach a big audience for future games. But also kind of starting small means that, if there's things that I hadn't considered, or I had made mistakes, or there's as every creator will sort of make some mistakes during the campaign, it's not going to be either financially crippling because it's such a small product. Even if we need to do a full reprint, it's not going to be the end of the world. And similarly, by starting small, I'm not spending 5 years on this epic, minis legacy game that then might not turn out to be any good, or there might not be a market for it. So, it was just perfect to start out with it.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like that's like a really wise choice that that I don't know if a lot of people go down that route. I know you can go with like very ambitious projects and stuff, but I think you've done like a genius job of getting a good game that's really like budget friendly, because a lot of people on Kickstarter, I know, they're just going to see that price and be like, it's the price of not even the price of a meal, it's so you really went like the really minimalist route, and I think it's doing really well, and you're kind of proving your own point, because at the moment it's at over like 1,000 backers. It's looks to be doing really well on the sides.
Yeah, it's doing really amazingly. I don't want to say a lot better than I hoped, because it sounds like I didn't think it was going to do well. But yeah, you really didn't know what to expect from the Kickstarter campaign. And you hear good things, reviewers like it, and people say, oh, I've played it and I really like it. I get messages from people saying, oh, they wanted to be the first backer, and it's really exciting. But also the most vocal people, like let's say there's 20 people that are like super excited about the game. It could have been just me and those 20 people. So you never really know sort of how much reach it has and how many people have kind of seen it and just sort of quietly watching on the sidelines. So yeah, it was really great that it had such a great start. I was hoping, because it's a fairly low funding goal, because it's pretty cheap to produce, I thought, okay, it's enough to do the first print run. And I kind of hoped from the people that had supporting so far and the mailing list I'd built up and things, I expected, okay, maybe we'll reach that funding goal on the first day. And then from there, that'll build some momentum. And then I clicked launch, and then 13 minutes later it had funded. And I think I'd been pretty prepared throughout the whole campaign. Like I prepared for the game to be complete at launch, which meant instead of post-campaign having to look at, okay, now how do I freight it over? Now how do I manufacture it? I got everything in place. So I knew 100% that I could definitely sort of fulfill that promise and it would all fit and work. So I'd done a lot of that work up front. But then when it came to the campaign, I did feel unprepared, because I know you're meant to sort of prepare some of your standard messages in advance, like, hey, we're 50% funded. Oh, we're nearly there. That all went by in 13 minutes. And so I just stared at the computer screen. I was like, oh, what do I do now? I was not prepared for that. So that was a nice feeling, but yeah, really blown away by that.
Yeah, no, but it's just so cool. It's also the idea of having a game where you don't actually need to think about logistics so much, or I'm sure you do, but just not having a parcel but being able to send the game in an envelope must really make it easier or lower costs, right?
Yeah, so I kind of set out to have that punch board fit into a C5 envelope, which is the largest envelope that can be sent from the UK with Royal Mail as a letter. So that was like the cheapest shipping option. And then there was quite a lot of logistics in the sense of measuring, the components to make sure they were the right thickness and weighing them on digital scales and getting the digital calipers out for the sizing. Then you've got the limitations of sort of the layout of the punch board, because there's sort of certain distance you need between die lines, and then there's bleed and things like that. So actually I ended up probably doing about maybe 10 or 12 different layouts of the punch board to get the maximum sort of amount of pieces on there and make them all fit. So there was a lot on that side. But yeah, having it sort of go into a letter, one of the other things I've done with the campaign is I've not had lots of, I say not lots, not really any stretch goals and things. So being complete at launch and not having stretch goals means there's not going to be sort of complicated things that might delay or disrupt shipping and things like that. It's literally you pick if you want one copy of MicroDojo or if you want two or more, because two of them bumps up the shipping category to a large letter. But then after that, you can stuff probably like 10 copies in there and it doesn't change the shipping price. So kind of there's your options. You either get one copy or you get more copies, and that's it. So it also minimizes the chance, because I'm going to be doing all the fulfillment myself, because it's such a budget game, having a fulfillment partner isn't really cost effective. It minimizes any mistakes that I might make as well. Shipping out, I think I'm up to about 1,500 copies because people have bought multiple now. Trying to then add, let's say there's like we've got different countries, potentially then different shipping options. Then if we start adding like different add-ons and things, the level of complexity just kind of goes sky high. So being able to just ship sort of that number of copies and send them out keeps things nice and simple, and hopefully get it out to people nice and quick as well.
Yeah. No, everything about the project seems to be like nice and simple.
Yeah, keeping it easy the first time.
Yeah, it's like everyone says to do it, but it's so cool when you actually see somebody doing it, and also seeing the success that you're having. I remember there was a Kickstarter project a little while ago, Scarlet Envelope, which was, I actually got to talk to the creators of it as well, and they did a similar thing where they had just basically puzzles or like mysteries in envelopes which they sent out, and it was, again, they did really well. I think just that price point at, how when people start out in the hobby, sometimes they tend to buy everything that's cheap, or like they just want to get a game collection. So I think that might factor into it at least a little bit. What was the marketing that you did for it?
Again, because it's a fairly budget game, there wasn't a lot of advertising and money gone into marketing. And I didn't have a marketing partner either. So I learned a lot from Nalin's group, the board game marketing Facebook group. That's been super helpful. A lot of what I was doing was kind of what you'd call organic marketing. So really just sharing things as they developed, asking people's advice, getting people involved in sort of various Facebook groups. A lot really on the design forums and things. And that was actually something that I considered is there's a lot of excitement and support for the game, but really, we tend to be sort of quite focused on our own community. So I was very focused on the design community and the Kickstarter sort of marketing community and things, but they're not necessarily the target audience for the game because, other designers are busy with their own designs and there's lots of other games to support. So I wasn't quite sure sort of how well that would pan out. One of the big sort of jumps, I suppose, that the mailing list had was after offering the print and play. So the print and play was always available sort of throughout development for people to download and test because it's nice to have people get eyes on it, and it's beneficial for me because people play it and give feedback. As you did pretty much straight after the very, very first prototype, which you printed and played and gave me some feedback. So that's always been helpful. But because the print and play is going to be offered to all backers as part of the campaign as well, whether they pledge, £1 or whether they buy physical copies, they'll still get a print and play. So I decided 1 month before the campaign launched that I would take down the print and play and stop making it publicly available so that then backers felt like they were getting some value for supporting the project. And I think that was a big difference because when I posted, even though it had been available for months and months, when I posted, it was on the print and play gaming group saying, hey, there's only like a few days left, and then I'm going to take the print and play down. I got basically my mailing list like doubled in the space of like 2 days. And I think having that, like knowing that it was going to not be made available soon. And, even if you wanted to back the project, okay, you've missed out by not, you've lost £1 basically if you miss out on that mailing list and sort of sign up and join later. But still, I think that made a big difference for people thinking, oh, I better sign up now and check it out. And yeah, getting it into people's hands and having people play it is just the best thing, I think.
Yeah, that's so funny that you mentioned that. It's like FOMO works, Because
I know it really does, and like, and even though I mean, it happens to me. Like, I'm on Kickstarter, and I'm like, there's 1 day left. I'm like, oh, am I interested in this? I probably wouldn't have been interested if it wasn't for the fact there's 1 day left. I'm like, oh, I'll get it. I'll back that project.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I don't know. It's weird because after that, when you think about it, it's. Usually, if it's a good game, you can get it later, and a lot of times you even forget about things like that. But it is like a marketing strategy, and it's one that works, and that's why it's that's part of why Kickstarter exists as well, because I think their whole idea is like smaller creators that aren't going to be out there otherwise, and a lot of those creators are only going to have a single print. I think probably most that are on there, so.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like single run games, or for people that don't want to be game designers. I say don't want to be game designers. I mean, like long term, you just want to produce a game and get it out there. Then yeah, it probably won't end up in retail, and because that's a whole other headache of dealing with sort of distribution and retail and things. So yeah, I think there's probably a lot of campaigns where they'll print, they'll send it out to fans, and then be like, cool, I made my game and it's done. And so yeah, you don't want to miss out on those.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what are your plans? Do you want to be a full-time game designer, or is that what's the most ambitious thing, or what do you see in the future of Prometheus Game Labs?
Yeah, that's definitely in the future. I want to make more games, and I do have plans for where Micro Dojo could go as well, but I don't intend on Micro Dojo being my one game. This is sort of a good way to start out, and by reaching lots of people. What I'm hoping to do is demonstrate, not only can I make a good game, but that I can run a Kickstarter campaign, that I can deliver on time, that can deliver it with good quality, and can handle sort of those problems like, if things get damaged or lost in the mail, I can handle those well. And basically people are happy with supporting the project and they're happy with the product they get. So the intention was to kind of gain experience, but also to kind of gain fans that will hopefully then when I produce later games will say, oh yeah, I bought the last game, I really liked it. Yeah, I'll get the next one. I was definitely inspired by Shem Phillips of the North Sea and the West Kingdom saga, because I think I played one of those games once, and then I played one of the other ones, and as I got more into it, I was like, you know what, I really like all of these games, to the point where, okay, whatever game comes next, I'm like, yeah, I'm probably going to buy that game, like even knowing nothing about it. And so building, a reputation like that, where, if I can have fans like I am of those games that will say, okay, you know what, I like the last one, I like the one before that, I will probably buy the next one. That would be a really great place to be. So that's kind of what I'm building towards.
Yes, well, Shem's all about building a brand. Actually, I just talked to the Micho a couple of days ago, who's the artist for all the West Kingdom games and the North Sea games, and
oh, cool.
It's awesome that I think that's really important as well. I think kind of if you can get to the point where people can instantly know who you are based on your product, because I think that's what they've done really well with Garfield Games.
Yeah. And that was the reason to go the Kickstarter route rather than going via a publisher, because I wanted to learn all of these other aspects of the entire process, but also to build something sort of complete rather than, just having, like, it's great. And I think you can make a name for yourself just having your name on a lot of boxes, maybe with different publishers and things. I mean, there's certainly a few, think of like any sort of Rosenberg game, you know what you're getting with that. And if you're a fan of the game, you're probably going to be a fan of all of the others. But I think it's probably much easier to make a name for let's say for a brand or for a type of game or that kind of thing. I don't know actually how many sort of fans of games tend to identify with the designer versus the publisher. That'd be an interesting question. I wonder what the answer to that is, because I think I really liked Anachrony and Cerebria and Tricerion as well. So I ended up I'm quite a fan of like Mind Clash games. Yeah. But some of those games are by different designers.
Yeah.
So they could actually be, very different games with very different styles, and yet I guess they somehow fit the brand. So your point about branding is probably quite important.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I guess that also depends on the development when it comes to publishing games. I know Anachrony is like a David Turksey game, and he just does projects everywhere. I have no idea how he does it, but he's got so many games coming out. That guy's doing amazing, I think. I actually have yet to play one of his games, and then hopefully I'll be able to talk to him. Because I just keep...
that'd be really cool, yeah.
Everywhere. Yeah. But yeah, it's
yeah, I've enjoyed those games.
Yeah, it's important to definitely build that brand up, and I think right now it's a bit easier, in my opinion, with Kickstarter. Otherwise, like I've talked to designers who go only publisher route as well as some that just do Kickstarters, and the ones that only go the publishing route, it seems like, I don't know, like Bruno Catala, for example, is one of those designers, and he just does that full time, and he doesn't want to deal with the rest of it, with everything that goes along with self-publishing. But I think just in Kickstarter does give you that opportunity, and it's you're still going to have to partner with people, but you have a bit more creative control, and if you have a vision, I think it's a vision for like how everything you want everything to be. I think that's, in my opinion, that's the better route in specific cases. If you're just
and it was nice having to learn.
Yeah,
I was gonna say it's nice having to learn everything, because even if I do future games that are much bigger budget, and then I do engage with a marketing partner who's going to handle the marketing, a fulfillment partner that's going to handle the logistics, and someone that can handle sort of the finance for things like sort of taxes in different countries. At least having learned all that this time round means at least I know what they're talking about when they talk to me about certain options, and I can also communicate with them what it is that I'm looking for. We can speak the same language. So I'm really grateful, even though it was quite a headache doing some of those things, like the manufacturing or the logistics. Logistics was probably the biggest headache. At least now, even if I don't do that in future, at least now I've got that sort of understanding to be able to communicate with the people that are experts in that area. And it does help things like the design process, like knowing how much space I had because of logistics and because of manufacturing, from the size of the punch board, which was the logistics really, to then the size of the tokens and how much you could fit on one and things like that. That did then inform some of the design choices about how simple I wanted to make it, and how many buildings I could include, and how many objectives I would have, and little sort of quality of life things like how I would split up the 3 cost versus the 1 cost tokens so that there was the correct number, and all of these kind of things. I think knowing that stuff does help the design a little bit, because you can factor all that in and make a nice sort of tight product which keeps costs down, makes people happy, makes your partners happy. That was really helpful learning that whole process. But I totally understand designers that love designing games and just want to keep designing games and do the fun bit and not deal with the headache of all the other stuff. Like if I look at just the game from that very first, let's say the first prototype, because I probably made a prototype about a week after sort of thinking of the core idea of that movement mechanic, through to the point where I commissioned the artwork, which is not to say that it was final, but it was like, okay, it's not going to fundamentally change from here. There might be some balance tweaks. I might cut a few things or add some things. That was probably about 6 weeks. And then preparing for the Kickstarter launch and doing all the other stuff was about 8 months. I did give myself a lot of time to do that, just so I was confident that I would have that time, but it definitely wasn't. I wasn't sitting around doing nothing in that 8 months. Plus then the fulfillment cycle after that will be at least 2 or 3 months sort of follow up, and then potentially even a longer sort of tail of follow up where, sort of replacement copies and things that need to be sent out. So yeah, looking at about 6 weeks to design the game and like a year to complete the campaign. So I can totally understand where if you're doing lots and lots of design, I'm not saying every game could be designed in 6 weeks, but if that was the case, I could have, got it to that point, started pitching it and gone, okay, now I'm going to start work on the next one and the next one. So I totally understand people that want to just work on the design, push it to a publisher, have them handle all of that less exciting stuff, and then get on with working on the next one.
Yeah. Well, right now you're right in the middle of the Kickstarter. There's 2 weeks left at the now as we're talking. Is there already stuff that you could have done better, or that like next time you think you're going to do differently?
There's a few things for sure. I'm pretty happy with the game and where the balance is. There's always for such a small game on the punch board, I wanted to pack as much game as possible in there, but I realized there's so much scope for adding even more game. Like one of the things I could have done is on the back side of the board just had a different layout, and not hugely different, enough that it would sort of fundamentally change the game, but it would need to be tested. But that all of a sudden, if you think about the number of combinations you've got in the game, you've doubled the possibilities of how much game you can play. Now, I'm not saying everyone's going to play through every combination. I think there's something like 3 billion setup combinations as there is. If you get through 3 billion games, you've probably had your money's worth out of that. But I think there's always more you could add, and there's certainly more maybe I would have liked to add. The solo mode is something I hadn't initially planned on, and then I think I wanted to just go back to doing something creative because I was in the middle of figuring out tax law and shipping options and things like that. So I worked on the solo mode, but getting that into the sort of the final package is still something as we speak I'm working on at the moment, like figuring how I can get that out to backers in a physical form. It's available as a print and play, so it's kind of a bonus if you're a solo player, but I'd quite like to get that as a physical thing. So there's always more that could be added. I'm pretty happy with the game as it is. The other sort of big thing that had been on my mind a lot was adding a box for it. And boxes for such a small game are another tricky thing, because the box actually ends up costing quite a lot more than the game itself, which feels like a really odd thing. But having a box means, A, it looks nice on a shelf, B, it's a little bit nicer to carry around. It fits quite nicely in the plastic bag that I'm including, and it'll fit sort of in a pocket or like a jacket pocket or something. But having a nice little box would, be able to sort of throw it in a rucksack a little bit more comfortably. So the box is something that I would like to do next time, let's say. It also makes it easier to get into retail, because just a punch board on its own, or even if it's sort of, plastic wrapped and with a nice cover, it's still not particularly retail friendly. It needs to have shelf presence, or it needs to be in a box there. And then you've got to go through, getting a barcode and doing all the testing so you can import it properly into countries and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a few things I would like to have done, call them stretch goals. But because this isn't, intended to be sort of the last you see of Micro Dojo, then yeah, there's definitely those kind of things in future. Another nice suggestion was like wooden meeples, so screen printed ones with the characters on, and one of the guys from the Print and Play group actually designed his own 3D printable meeples in those shape, and sort of glammed up his copy of the game. So yeah, I'd like to include those at some point as well.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So I had a question. I'm doing the exact same thing that we talked about before we started, where I had a question in my mind and then I forgot what it was.
That's fine.
Yeah.
There is one more thing actually that I've just thought of, which we mentioned in terms of kind of what else I'd like to include. I am aware that there's a lot crammed onto the building tiles, and they are a little bit tiny. And it does mean that the really nice artwork for them is on the back, which you don't really get to see much unless you have a look. I would quite like to do a larger version of the game longer term. I don't know whether that will happen or not, but I think there's enough gameplay in it to justify a larger size and a higher price. Basically, I don't think by sort of increasing the size, making it a bit more manageable, and packing it into like a $20 box or something, I don't think you're then thinking, oh, I'm paying a lot of money for a micro game.
Yeah.
So that would be something probably bundled in with like some extra content, the wooden meeples, the solo mode, all of those things. That's a potential longer term as well. The nice thing about kind of launching it in this way is you've got an idea for the demand, and then the game is out there. People will be playing it, potentially discussing it, talking about it, and then whether I go down that route myself or maybe then approach a publisher and say, look, we've got all this demand, the game's been received really well, maybe we produce a larger version and get it out to a wider market. That's a potential future for the game as well. So yes, I'm aware that some of the tokens are just a little bit too tiny, a little bit fiddly. I'm okay with that as a design decision because of the amount of gameplay that's packed into that little space. But I'm aware also that it could be larger, and it certainly wouldn't impact sort of the value of the game to have a larger, more expensive version that's a bit easier to handle.
Yeah, for sure. Although I think that's part of your kind of your angle, or part of your pitch, just having that very small package, kind of like Button Shy Games, where they have all of their games are 18 cards, and all of them come with like these little wallets. I don't know if you've seen them.
Yeah, I definitely looked at Button Shy Games and what they've done, and tried designing an 18-card game myself, and it's hard. It's a real challenge getting a good game into a small package. So yeah, really impressed with Button Shy Games. But you're right. No, keeping the small size and the low price was definitely like a core part of the campaign. I think I've realized as it's gone on, and as the campaign's gone on, and as I've sort of worked on things, what I've really focused on is keeping the shipping costs down and keeping the price down, but then wanting to give people more choice about if they do want more. So, for example, there's a premium shipping option, which it's only a couple of pounds more, but it just upgrades the delivery service to be quicker. It doesn't change anything else. It's just a speed thing. So if you're in, let's say New Zealand or Australia, for example, the shipping estimate is up to 12 weeks. Now, that's a long time. It might not take that long, but it's just it could be up to that. The premium option makes it 6 to 7 days or something is the estimate, so it really speeds it up. So I wanted to give people the choice of saying, look, I've crammed as much game as possible into a cheap price and a cheap package. If you want to have faster shipping, you can add that on. I don't know if it'll get there in the campaign, but I considered it would be the same with a box, or maybe the same with those sort of printable solo cards, to say, look, I've got as much as possible into this package, but if you do want extra, it's available. If you don't, and you just want, the cheap option, then that's also totally fine. So giving people kind of a lot of choice and control over sort of what they get as a package, rather than just, saying, well, actually, I could add all this stuff. And then it's, as you say, it's no longer a sort of a cheap product with cheap shipping. It's just a regular game at that point.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about something that I think a lot of designers, including myself, have a problem with, and I think you may have done really well. So I want to ask you: it's how do you know when to in that design process? How do you decide when the game is finished, because like you said, and I know it's easy sometimes to be like, okay, now I can add this, and then you add that, and then you realize, okay, now maybe I can do something else with it, and everything sort of avalanches, and I think you were able to cut it at, at a point, or it looks like it, where it's, how did you decide? I guess my question is, how did you decide when that's it? That's what the game is going to be, and it's ready for Kickstarter.
Yeah. So having having the space helped, because I knew how much I could fit on the punch board. So I was like, well, it's not going to be any more than that, and that was quite nice, because I think I set out originally to have like 16 buildings, and then when I cut it down to 12, I was like, okay, these are the 12 best ones out of all the ones I've thought of. And then the other thing that really helped was actually having the Kickstarter date in mind. I think I formally announced the date around November time, planning to launch in May. And it wasn't necessarily because people were hanging on, desperately waiting to know when the launch was going to be. It was just, it gave me a deadline. And I was like, you know what, the game's pretty much there. I've got a lot of other stuff to learn, but I can figure it out by May. And that, by having that deadline, I was like, okay, I know it needs to be done by then. I know if I want the manufacturing to be done sort of ready to go prior to launch, then that, it needs to be done and sort of laid out nicely with the die lines and everything before that. I know we need to have done prototypes and sent it to reviewers before that. So you can kind of work backwards and say, okay, that means I need to have everything kind of finalized by like January, February. So having that date definitely helped, because there's always more tweaking you can do and more playtesting and adding more cool stuff. I think also not planning for this to be the end, but thinking, okay, you know what, there's a lot more stuff that this game could offer. You can sort of start to push some of that into, a potential future expansion and things like that. Having that in mind, that you might have an expansion, means you don't feel like, oh, I've designed all this cool stuff and I'm not going to get to include half of it, because you can just put sort of the complex stuff there, or the sort of some of the things that don't quite fit with the core sort of simplicity of the base game. And that's how the advanced mode came about as well. Originally, the 4 meeples, they were different because there were buildings associated with each of them, and if you bought that building, you got to unlock that sort of character's movement ability just for you. The trouble with that was, if those buildings didn't come out, or if only like one of them came out, it felt like the meeples didn't really have that much character. So including that as the advanced game mode meant, even though I didn't have space on the punch board to include those 4 separate buildings that had the meeple movement abilities, they can just take up one panel in the rulebook to say, here's the advanced game mode, here are the abilities that you can use. So in a way, I've increased the size of the punch board by 4 tokens by just including them in the rulebook as kind of abilities available for the advanced game. So that's another thing, is if you feel like there's more content that you can add, some of the more complex or some of the stuff that doesn't necessarily quite fit with a nice sort of core base game can be a nice advanced game mode. And that way, if someone's really, played the game to death and they want a new experience, they can try something that's a little bit different. And then most people will just probably play the base game and, still enjoy it. And then it's nice and tight, and it's a good solid base game without sort of adding all the extra sort of weird and complex stuff that you've designed.
Yeah, you don't want too much weird and complex stuff. I think you made 2 really good points. One is about trimming to like what you said, trimming from 16 to 12, and just thinking about what are the best things in the game, and kind of taking it down to, basically to its core. And I think the second thing, which is actually mixed into that, is having those restrictions. In your case, it was restrictions of components, but I find that, and a lot of people talk about how with restrictions you kind of get creative and you tend to be more productive, or make, it's so much easier. Even when it comes to talking, as we spoke earlier, like if you're given something very particular to talk about, it's so much easier than it is if you're like, all right, well, go ahead, talk, about anything. But I think that's just how we tend to work better, and I think it's important for designers, set those deadlines and set those restrictions. Learn what you can actually do. when it comes to like printing.
Yeah.
What's your budgets and all of that stuff, I think factors in and can potentially make up for a better product.
Yeah, and I think it's good having that in mind. Yeah, that end result when you start is quite good, because I probably could have included 16 buildings if I was doing 2 punch boards, say, or if I didn't have that restriction. But then those 4 buildings, just if you think about it sort of from a theory perspective, the 12 buildings I have are the 12 that I think are the best ones. So if I included 16, then what I've done is I've given people the 4 worst buildings that I designed.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not the worst ones that I designed, but the more that get added are in theory the least good parts of the ones you've included, because if they were the best ones, they'd be in the base 12. So it's just one way to think about, like, the more you add. I'm not saying the more you add, the worse the game gets, but yes, if you could order like every component from like the best one to the worst one, then by cutting, you're kind of cutting the worst ones. You're not cutting the best ones. So in theory, you're only including the best parts. Whereas if you have sort of unlimited space, not necessarily unlimited, but if you've not given yourself a limitation, then you can just keep adding more and more. And one of those things has to be the worst part of the game.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's so important to also like look for that and listen for that. Like me, I heard this, and this wasn't actually something that had to do with game design, but it was about just giving feedback. And I heard the questions which I'm starting to incorporate in playtesting, which is what's the 10%, like the best 10% of this game, and what's the worst 10% of this game. And if you had to if there's something right now that you need to leave in, what would it be? And it's something that needs to be cut or that you would cut in the final version. What's that going to be? And I find that asking those, like, first of all, asking yourself that and asking playtesters that and being mindful of what are those things that you kind of, when you do them, you're not as happy. Like, I feel with Micro Dojo, like, there's some buildings that I always want to build more than others, of course depending on the game state. But I think kind of that question usually leads to game development.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice. I hadn't heard that before, but I like that kind of. What's the best 10% and what's the worst? Because over playtesting, I suppose if you keep getting that feedback on the same, then you can start to cut that 10%, or maybe even expand that top 10%. If players really enjoy doing that one thing, then how can you do more of that thing in the game, and vice versa. So that's a nice way of looking at it and focusing questions on kind of the best bits and the worst bits, rather than a sort of general, I like this was okay, this didn't really work for me. I like that 10% thing. I'm going to think about that when I'm designing something. I'm hoping I'll get a chance to do some more design work, actually, because everything's been so focused on the campaign. To go back to your earlier question of how did you know when the game was done, it was also just, it got to the point where I probably could have spent more time. You can always spend more time on the game, but because there were other things that needed doing, like sorting out the logistics and the manufacturing and preparing for the campaign and all of that stuff, it meant that I didn't have as much time to focus on the design. So it was maybe not so much that I was like, okay, this is done, there's nothing more I can do to it. It was that I'm like, okay, you know what, it's done and I'm happy enough with it that it's not a priority compared to the other things that need doing. So I wouldn't say I never found the time to sit down and do some design, but I didn't really feel any sort of value. Like, I didn't feel this burning need to say, oh, you know what, I need to sit down and give this one more test, or I need to just, I didn't have a goal in mind for anything that needed testing. I wasn't like, okay, let's see how this alternate setup works, or let's see how, whether this building is actually balanced. I was like, you know what, there's nothing really that's jumped out at me to say, okay, this needs more testing and needs some work. So maybe the answer isn't that. Maybe the answer isn't that you'll look at your game and think, you know what, it's done, it's perfect, it's done enough. Maybe the answer is just when other stuff that needs doing is more important, then because if you felt like that the game was the thing that really needed a lot of work, that would be top of your priority list. So if you don't feel that looking at the game more is something that's more important than the other stuff, then that's probably a good indicator that it's at a point that you're pretty happy with it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's at some points, because I know a lot of people can, be perfectionists about it and kind of want to get the very best game out there, and I think that's great. That's a really good aim to have. But I find that a lot of times when I've worked with certain designers, you can get into a sort of that can actually be like a negative thing that you're doing, or an unproductive thing that you're doing, because you know, if you just I think at some point you need to like kind of let the game go, say that it's finished, and even if if this was your best right now, in 1 year your next game is probably going to be better, you know. And I think you're going to be worse off if you spend that 1 year working on this thing rather than just letting it go and starting from the base up again, and with what you've kind of learned from this one, and going through the entire process.
That's totally true. And yes, I haven't had as much design time as I would like because I've been so focused on the campaign. I'm because I'm going back to the UK to ship everything out, and to spend a little bit of time with family who I've not seen for a long time because of, you know, travel restrictions. I'd planned to head back to the UK sort of right after the campaign closes and then start shipping stuff out. Now it's possible, because the UAE is still on the red list for the UK as we speak, there will be a long quarantine period going there. So I might end up going via somewhere else. So I'm actually sort of planning a 10-day kind of a holiday sort of before I get to the UK to do the fulfillment, where I'm planning to just sort of sit down and do some design work and get back into that and have a bit of sort of creative time again, rather than just sort of getting stuff done for the campaign. But you reminded me when you were talking about designing games, saying, you know, your game a year from now is probably going to be a lot better than the best one you've produced right now. I can't remember where I heard the story, but it was this. It might not even be a true story, but it was this thing about the pottery class, I think, where the professor kind of like split people into groups and said, okay, you guys are going to only produce one pot and you're going to be graded on the quality, and then another group is going to be graded on the quantity they produce. So it doesn't really matter how good they are. They're just, you know, you just need to churn these things out. And then what they found after however long it was, that the group that had focused on doing one thing really, really well and getting high quality, if you looked at, like, say, the 100 pots that the other group had made that would just, you know, just throw them together, make 100 of them, they actually found the quality of those ones was also higher because they'd produced so many of them, even though probably a lot of them were lower quality. Some of them were really fantastic quality because they just had that practice in doing it over and over and over. And it's a really good sort of, I don't know, parable, I guess, to say, you know what, just keep making stuff and get better at making stuff rather than focusing on making your one thing really, really perfect.
Yeah, for sure. And
yeah, I liked that story.
Yeah, no, it's a really good story, and I find it true with, like, finding a good method of practice. I think is important, and with, like, as I told you, like, coming from a musical background, for me, practicing was a big part of it. You know, it's you spend a large chunk of your day with your instrument and kind of practicing. And I find that optimizing your practice is probably one of the, like, most important things in music. And I think in design, though, it's a little bit more, like, elusive. What does design practice actually mean? And, you know, because is it only when you sit down with the game and actually, like, make changes to it or try things out? I think, like, because now that I've talked to more designers, I think that one of the things that you can do as, like, concrete practice is, first of all, you know, play other games, try to make changes to other games. Mm-hmm. And then one thing that I keep hearing and that I realize that I do myself, and I'm going to ask you if you do it, is almost always a large part of that design time is actually spent in your head, kind of thinking about how those changes or making changes, thinking about how they're going to happen. And I don't know, for me it's usually before bed, and I've said this a couple of times on the podcast, but usually, like, before going to bed, I kind of play through the game in my head, and I find that that's usually where I get, okay, well, tomorrow this is what I'm going to do, and then this is what I'm going to do. Is that something that you do?
Sometimes, because it definitely helps to have, like, an intention, and sometimes I actually take notes, not just when I have game ideas, but when I think of something that needs doing. And annoyingly, I always seem to have my best ideas at the most inopportune times. Like I have quite a lot of ideas if I'm swimming. I think because there's maybe not too many other sounds when you're sort of under the water, and that's a good time to sort of think. And but yeah, usually like either driving, swimming, or just about to fall asleep. Like basically the times that you're not actually sitting down to do some design work.
Yeah.
Or quite often sort of listening to a podcast. So I usually like make a quick note, like on a checklist. I use Google Keep of just, okay, this is something I want to do. You know, at the moment, some of that is, okay, this is an update I would like to give people on the campaign. This is something I could write about or share. Sometimes it's just a game idea that you think, okay, I want to explore that. So, yeah, I think you're right. A lot of that creative time, it sort of comes at you, or it comes at me anyway, sort of unannounced. You know, it just sort of pops into my head, and I think, oh, I need to then sit down and explore that. There's been a few times, particularly last year, because things were sort of fairly quiet. I got into a bit of routine of saying, you know what, there's not much going on. I'm going to go to a cafe this morning, and I'm going to spend a couple of hours on design. And after doing that for a few weeks, I found it really, really hard, because I'd be sitting there thinking, okay, come on, design, like, come at me. I've got 2 hours, like, let's do this. And nothing really, really comes. So what I try and do sometimes is sort of let those creative ideas and things kind of happen when they happen. And if I'm really not feeling it, but nothing's really coming, but I do have the time, I kind of do, I don't know what to call it, but, you know, there's like that creative time where you're sort of having all these ideas and you're fleshing something out. And then there's the other time where you're just doing work, like just getting on with stuff. And sometimes that's things like, you know, tidying a layout or fixing some of the artwork, or, you know, drafting an email, or some of those things where I think, okay, you know, if no kind of cool ideas are coming, at least I can still do something. Because when you're full of ideas and you're thinking about this next cool game that you could make, you don't really want to be sitting down and doing admin and, you know, drafting an email or updating the website and things like that. So I think using that time to do something that's productive, even if it's not creative work, I think then leaves you that time later to do the creative work. So that's something I try and do. I'm still definitely learning about sort of, you know, I've had a employed job for a long time, and, you know, you kind of work 9 to 5, and if you don't really feel it one day, you know, you still get paid, and, you know, you can always try again the next day. Whereas doing something yourself and doing creative work is a very different kind of lifestyle if you're used to a sort of a more structured job and sort of projects and things. And yeah, you know, if I don't do anything on the game, nothing gets done. So, you know, I'm very aware that whatever it is I'm doing directly contributes to how good the end result is. So yeah, it's been interesting kind of adjusting to that kind of approach as well. I think anyone in a sort of creative profession probably identifies with that and has found methods that work for them.
Yeah. This brings me to a question that I started really liking to ask people, because I think it's super important. It's something that I struggle with as well. But the question is kind of, again, I heard it from somewhere else. But the question is, do you tend to have a schedule for these like creative times, or like you said, if they're not creative times, they're something else? Or do you just go by inspiration? It's kind of, the question is schedule versus inspiration.
I know what the correct answer is, which is it's good to have a schedule and structured time and to get into the habit of doing it. At the moment, I tend to work pretty chaotically, I think, and I tend to work in like bursts of I don't think I have a great attention span, and I'll probably be doing like 4 or 5 things at once. And as soon as I hit a stopping point, I'll bounce to something else and do something else. So in a way, I'm pretty unstructured with how I spend my time, but then I also tend to sort of write lists and things that need doing as I think of them, even if I can't do them right now. So I sort of think of the way I work as a bit like doing a jigsaw puzzle. Like I'll pick up a piece and try and put it somewhere. If it doesn't fit, I'll just chuck it aside and pick up another piece and try that instead. So that's kind of my approach. As I sort of move to potentially doing something like this full time, I'm aware that I will want to sort of structure my time and things. I don't find I get too distracted by, you know, playing video games and hanging out and things. I am quite driven to sort of keep working on the game, and I do give myself those breaks, and I don't feel too guilty about maybe not getting stuff done much one day and then coming at it hard again the next day. But no, having that structure, I think, even though I don't do it at the moment, is something I do think is going to be important to keep things moving. And it's very easy to fall out of a habit of doing something. I think of things like, going to the gym and stuff. It doesn't take long to fall out of that habit, and it's really hard to get back into it again. So keeping a structure, I think, is going to be much more important as I spend more and more time on game design, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with you about the falling out of a habit. Or it's when you have a habit that's not as strongly built up, I think. Also, another thing, it's I know you probably don't deal with it that much, but when you have other people kind of when you can push each other with other people. I know, like, just immediately when you said going to the gym, I realized that because I usually go with a friend of mine, and it's, we always, when you get a message like, are we going to the gym, it's much easier to go than, or it's having that reminder from the outside world makes it a lot easier. But
yeah,
do you actually have
and if you don't go, you're letting that other person down.
Yeah.
But if you don't feel it, if you're just going on your own, you're like, I'm not feeling it. Like, no one's going to hold you accountable. No one's going to know you didn't go to the gym today. Whereas if you've got someone relying on you, then you're like, oh, okay, I'll make the effort because they're relying on me. We're going together. So it's a little bit like I think like almost like flipping a coin. If there's a 50-50 chance that you might not do that thing you need to do. Well, if you now need to flip 2 coins and they both need to come up heads, then suddenly you've reduced your chance of not doing it by quite a lot. So yeah, having a partner is something. I know I get involved with everything, and I don't think I'm that great at delegation because I get involved in everything. But having a partner to work with and to keep each other kind of pushing forward and to bounce ideas off, I think is really valuable. I think anyone that works with a partner in game design and things is. I'll say very lucky, but also it's just going to lead to better games and better results.
Yeah, I think so as well. How is it kind of with you? I know you've built this community around it, meaning that you've collaborated with a lot of people, but the main aspects of the game, you're doing all of the or most of the legwork, I guess. How is that process for you? Doing it on your own?
Yeah, I found it okay because I've really enjoyed learning about everything, and even the frustrating moments like I probably spent a month just on like figuring out the VAT situation and how I was going to ship it and how to do registration in different countries and all of this kind of stuff. So that can be frustrating. But I think because I had the deadline and things, I was still motivated to do it, even though it was hard. I will say that doing a game, in air quotes, on your own is, firstly, I'd say it's not really possible. If you look at the list of people that I've thanked there's a section in the Kickstarter of just people I wanted to give a special shout out to. There's probably about 30 or 40 people in that list of either people that contributed like a really important idea to the game, people that helped out, friends of mine that helped out with things like sort of the graphic design or even just sort of pushing, getting the word out there. There's people that have helped volunteer do rulebook translations. There's people that have done proofreading. There's people that have advised on sort of the cultural aspects and some changes that can be made there to improve it. There's the artists. There's the printers. I didn't even name all of the playtesters. Like there's probably been about 40 or 50 playtesters or more that have just played the game either once or several times and given their feedback. So easily for a very small game that's been made, entirely on my own, there's probably about 80 to 100 people at least that have been involved and contributed in some way. So yeah, it's insane kind of how many people kind of come together to make a project, even for something small and, it doesn't have a big team behind it. Maybe even more people than if there was a big team, because maybe if you have all that stuff in-house as a team of, let's say, 5 people that can handle all those roles, maybe you don't look outside so much for support. So yeah.
And you
a lot of people have gone in to make this.
No, it's always a collaboration. Even the smaller projects, unless you're Ryan Lockett. I made that joke as one of your hosts.
Yeah.
No, but always. It's you're never actually alone. The games that I've seen, kind of doing playtesting, that were. You can see that it's a designer by themselves. You can see their weak points as well. So I think it's really
having someone to come up. Yeah, and someone, if you do have a partner, someone to come up with a different perspective. I think probably what I should do in looking for a partner for game design is not look for someone that likes the same kind of games I do and gets the same kind of things. It's probably better to come, with someone that has a really different idea for the types of games that they like to play and things to have that different perspective. So we'll see. This feels a little bit like a Lonely Hearts advert now. Like, people looking for a partner, apply within.
Awesome. So to kind of finish up, I know you've also said that you're kind of busy. What would be your advice to somebody who wants to start off in game design, or has an idea for a game, but really hasn't done that research that you've done in the past year or so?
I've actually spoken to a lot of people. When I mention I'm designing a game, loads of people have an idea for a game. Especially gamers. Everyone's got an idea for the game. And I really push them. I'm like, okay, so make it, try it out. And, people tell me often people, when they tell me about their game, they either tell me a lot about the theme or they tell me a lot about the experience that the players are going to have. Cause you can see it in your head. You're like, oh, you know what? This is going to be, super tight, and there's going to be this bluffing element, and people are not going to know who's on their team. And it's going to be, really exciting when you reveal at the end who the traitor was. And like, it's really exciting to hear that. But I guarantee as soon as you make it, probably within your first 10 minutes of actually playing that game, you're going to go, oh, this doesn't quite work the way I wanted it. And that's a good thing, because that's, now you've got your first problem to fix. And then once you fix that, you've made your game better already. But yeah, I think a lot of time people have this idea and I say, okay, so go and make it. And I don't know, maybe people think it needs to be sort of finished before they can test it, or maybe they think, oh, you know what, I need to get everything perfect in my head before I make it. I would definitely say, like, just make it. I mean, when you played that first prototype, that was a week of it in my head going, oh, well, what if people just keep moving to the same space, or what if the game's solvable? Then it's no fun. Like, how do I stop that? And how do I stop people moving to the same space? How do I make sure it's balanced? And then after a week, I was like, okay, I'm not going to fix all these problems in my head. I sat down for about 10 hours straight and just made a prototype, like that playable thing. And then I got some feedback, and you gave me some of your thoughts, and then other people played it and gave me their thoughts, and it started developing from there. So yeah, just making it, accepting that it's probably not going to work the first time, but then seeing that as the first, probably biggest step towards getting the game done, because until you do that, it's never going to be a game. So I'd say just get into it and start trying. Like, there's no exam at the end. No one's judging you if it doesn't work. Just make it and start that first step.
Yeah, sure. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
No, thanks. It's been a lot of fun.